Welcome to the sample first chapter from the Swithen, Book 1, Our Man on Earth, by Scott Tellick. The Swithen tells the real ancient legend of King Arthur, not some made-up BS, in modern versions. Book 1 gives the real origin story of Merlin, which was set down in the year 1215. The story is that the devil wanted a man on Earth to lead people into temptation, so he impregnated a human woman. But she had him baptized at birth, meaning that he retained the powers he had from the devil, but is able to use them for good. Unfortunately, at that time, bearing an illegitimate child carried an automatic sentence of death by burning. This chapter, which opens the novel before it flashes back to when the demon came into her life, is a scene from the trial of the mother, Melinda, and shows the wit and attitude that Merlin displays, even as a baby. Part 1, Chapter 1. The judge stared down at the accused woman with a pitiless gaze. She was a plain but not unattractive woman, with a gentle and unassuming demeanor, one that made certain people feel that they could, or perhaps even made them want to, exert power over her, to poke her and see her squirm. But he did not know the quiet power she had within her, and he certainly did not understand what he was dealing with in regard to the infant resting quietly in her arms, his eyes trained steadily on him, focused with an eerie intensity that no other baby of that age displayed. "It is well known that the punishment for having a child out of wedlock is death in all cases," said the judge. "This woman refuses to name the father of this child despite repeated opportunities to save her own life by doing so," he raised his open palms in exasperation, "and insists against all sense that the father was a demon who laid upon her in her sleep." His lips curled into a smirk of patronizing condescension, and he raised the stamp to mark the case as closed. "Which is something we can never believe, and therefore," he said simply, "it is with great justification that we do justice upon you." Melinda's head lowered in shame and resignation, but at this Merlin squirmed out of her arms, crawled forward a bit, and stood on his two legs on the table. His face bore an expression of anger, and he pointed directly at the judge, enough that he leaned back in his seat as though facing a blast. "It is not right that she be dead, for she has not deserved it," the baby said, his sharp, mature voice sounding harshly in the quiet room. At this, a gasp was heard from all watching, then a long moment of silence, as all waited in suspense for what might happen next. It was not just the wonder of a talking infant that impressed them all so, but his sure way of talking and fully adult voice. "And," Merlin continued in the amazed silence, "if justice were to be truly done against all women that had made ado with men other than their husbands," and here he turned to scan the assembled people who'd come to watch the judgment, causing many to gasp anew at the sight of his angry, sharply focused eyes, each cringing as his pointed finger traced across them. "Many were there here worthy to be burnt," the child finished. This caused a hubbub and gasp of sensation throughout the crowded room. "And as touching that this is put upon my mother," he said, turning once more back to face the judge, "it is not fair that she be judged to the death, for she is nothing guilty," continued the child. "If you will hear her story, instead of judging her instantly based on what you know of past women with none of the strength or fortitude she has, you will see that she does not deserve to be burnt in the fire as a common harlot." The judge's mouth began to waver, but he still could not form words. Merlin walked to one side of the platform and pointed to an old hermit sitting at the table adjacent. "Ask of that holy man there, or the two midwives who attended my mother while locked in the tower," he pointed to the women seated on the other side, "and you will hear a story that will prove to you that I am no child of man, and this woman you are tormenting should walk free." The judge finally was able to shut his mouth, and he sat back, placing his hands on the desk in front of him, seemingly wakened by the sudden explosion of voices and exclamations from the townspeople gathered in the stands behind the main floor. He stammered. "Very well," he shouted, calling the room to order. He breathed in slowly, staring at the standing infant, who looked back at him boldly before he spoke again. "Very well," he said calmly. "Let us hear the story. Convince us, if you can," he gestured, and his lip curled slightly in a sneer of condescension. "Let us find out how this child came to be, so that we may judge if this woman is worthy to walk free among us in this town." The baby cocked his head slightly, nodded and bowed to the judge with an overdone graciousness that bordered on impudent parody. Then he stood and said, "You'll find that the story begins in hell." And with that, he put his small arms round his mother's neck and settled in once more to be embraced by her arms. Thank you for listening. The Swithen Book 1, Our Man on Earth, gives the real origin story of Merlin and the incredible strength and fortitude of his mother. It's the first book of the Swithen, which is currently 2 books into an unprecedented 25-novel retelling of the real Arthurian legend, with the detail and scope to give this massive and powerful saga the full majesty it deserves. This is the original epic fantasy, and the story is complete to the end right now, meaning no making it up as we go along. Book 2 is available now, and Book 3, which brings us up to the birth of Arthur, will be available in fall 2018. Look for The Swithen by Scott Tellick in ebooks and paperbacks at Amazon, and audio versions at Audible.